Okay, with the item definition and item fragments covered in the last section, we can move on to how we enhanced the inventory window from the standard starter kit to be a bit more capable. So for that, we're going to stay all in the content browser. So as a recap, we're in our plugin. We have enabled our plugin, which has our items, inventory, abilities, skills, etc., all in one plugin. We have our item definitions, which we talked about in the last video, where we have different item fragments that represent individual item definitions. And then in the UI folder, we copied from Shooter Explorer the basic items. So we copied the interaction prompt, the grid, the screen, the tile as those main elements. They have some things here around a sort of toaster pop-up, which we've yet to explore and determine whether it makes sense. And yeah, so those are the basic widgets that are on the are in the inventory system. We will let's start at the bottom of the stack. So if you open the original inventory tile that comes with the starter kit, you get this big green colored image. So there's literally nothing on the inventory tile, and that's why when you pick things up in the starter kit, everything starts off as just kind of a green blob. So what we've done is taken the inventory tile, created an overlay, added our border around the edge, added the image in the middle, added a sort of a counter for when we stack items, which is not yet enabled, and a small embellishment in the corner. So if I wanted to put a gold star, I could add a gold star to this particular item. So basically the tile is just the visual representation of the core data that's in the fragment. If we go to the graph, you will see on construct and pre-construct, we basically just pulled the icon image, this icon right here, and stored it as a default, and same with the embellishment, stored it as a default. So basically on construct, we're just storing those. In case we are missing one of those in our fragments, we'll just replace it with the default. This event fires automatically when a new item is added to the grid. So when you're populating the grid, this event is triggered, and what is passed to it is the list object. So we immediately trigger, when a tile is being added to the grid, we immediately trigger this. We cast that to our item instance. So the instance gets converted into an item instance. We're just storing that for now. And then we're picking up the icon fragment. So we're saying, okay, in this instance, go get me the fragment that represents how I should show this on screen. If I fail, then I'm not doing anything. But if I do get that fragment, if I find that fragment on the item, then I'm basically going to pull off the rarity. I'm going to pull off the icon. I'm going to pull off the embellishment, and I'm going to update the tile with those elements. And so these are just short functions in order to just clean it a little bit up. So formatting rarity is basically just picking up the colors based on whatever the enum is and passing out either gray, white, green, blue, etc., making the brush sizes irrelevant and passing that back out. And then this is updating the various components. So the tile is quite simple in that it simply receives this event and formats the tile based on the actual fragment that's defined for the item. The only other things that's happening here, which we will come back to later, is we have some mouse drag and drop events that are used when we're dragging it and dropping it on the trash, but we'll come back and hit those in a minute. But that's the basic tile. So that's kind of the lowest level. Then the level up from the tile is the grid. So if we go into the grid again is very simple. It's just a common tile view. It's a simple widget with only one container in it, which as we add, so let's go to There we go. Not sure why that took so long. So the grid, slightly more complex than the tile. It has on the construct, we are grabbing the owning player, which is the player controller. From that, we're grabbing the inventory management component. This component was added to the player when the shooter core plugin is initialized. It added, if you remember from a couple videos back, the inventory item manager was added to the player controller. So we get that. We basically store it, and then we pull the icon fragment and set it as our default. So this is basically our filter is whatever we have set in this fragment class. And so upon construct, we're just saying, hey, by default, let's just see everything. We're not pre-filtered on anything else. And then we call refresh grid. Refresh grid clears out the grid, so clears it out, takes that inventory management component that we cached a few minutes ago. We get all items, so we get every item that's in the inventory management, and we loop through each of those. As we're looping, we're checking if this fragment is found. And so on initialization, we have it set to all, but as we press the filter buttons, we're basically changing this class to be the fragment that we want to filter to. So this fragment works as our filter that says only items that contain this fragment should be shown in the inventory at any given time. So we find that fragment and it's valid. We then grab the corresponding inventory icon because we still need all the visuals. So rather than replicating the visuals in every fragment, we have one fragment for the visuals. So we need to make sure that we should show that. And there's a Boolean flag that says, yeah, you should show that. So if I have the inventory icon and the show item is checked, we continue and we add that item to the grid. Once we do this, that triggers the tile to run the rest of the blueprint that we just saw. This stacking logic was in the original grid that Epic was working on. And so I just left it down here. Haven't done anything with it. We'll have to explore more on exactly what they were thinking around that. But that's basically all the grid does, is whatever this filter is, when you hit refresh, it will just trigger and simplify the list. Okay, we can move back from there to, let's go to the inventory screen next. So the inventory screen starts to bring some of the elements together. So it's a common activatable widget, and when you activate it, it will block input. It'll be the top of the stack. You can see that we've built just a center window. For now, we've chosen to have the filters right in the widget. We may shift that to be read from a data source and built dynamically, but right now, each of the filter buttons are just inserted in this horizontal box across the top. Then we have our actual main grid, which is the widget we just looked at. And then at the bottom, we just added a drop zone, a trash zone, and a back button. So as I drag and drop things on either the drop in the world or trash icon, they will act accordingly. So let's go to the graph for this one. And on initialize, we listen for a refresh. So basically, whenever the systems pass a UI action inventory refresh message through the broadcast system, this will pick it up, and upon receiving that, we'll basically just refresh the grid. So it's a way to say, hey, whenever you want me to refresh the grid, all you have to do is broadcast this tag, and the grid will refresh automatically. So on initialization, we're listening for our refresh. We're making sure our gameplay tag is true, and then we're listening for our buttons, which is very similar in that when we get a button event, whatever the button message is, we're going to receive that message, and we're going to perform actions based on those various buttons. So they're just two ways to say, and this just is destroying it. I'm sitting here listening. I'm listening to any button that you press. If it is the button that I know what to do with, I will take the appropriate action. So in this case, I will filter to the equipable items and then refresh my grid. So again, a bit of a hope here. We're gonna hopefully fix this and pass the class through in the payload, which is next on our to-do list. So we won't have to have the switch. So we'll just pass a payload, and that payload will contain the fragment, and then this will get much more simplified. So that's the inventory screen. So we have the screen, the grid, and the tile. We then look at our filter buttons, which are identical. The only difference in a filter button is, besides the actual look of it, is, well, let's look at the bottom one first. So when the button is clicked, the corresponding action tag, so this one is filtered to buildable components, is sent to the gameplay message subsystem. So it's this gameplay tag is broadcasted to this, is broadcast through the system. Full stop. In our next release, we're going to convert this struct to include the fragment that we want. So for now, basically the gameplay broadcast and the receipt of that gameplay, which is here, have to have the same payload. The payloads can vary, but they have to be the same payload. So if I press this button and I broadcast this inventory filter build, and I pass this particular struct as its payload, then the receiver has to have the exact same payload for these two to connect properly. So the filter fires that off. The filter is also, on initializing, listening for any UI actions that are filters and not necessarily my filter. So in this case, I'm sending a filter, and that filter includes inventory filter.build, because this is the build button. It is also listening for all filters, regardless of the .build, .ability, or .anything. We do a check to make sure it's not myself. If it's not myself, and I'm currently selected, if this action button was selected, then I'm just going to clear the selection. And this is what allows the visualization of the buttons. Let's actually just show you that. That's probably easier to show. And I need some items. So when I click a button, and so if I go to this button, it's grayed out and this one's illuminated. When I click this button, it fires off the filter build on click, and this button is listening for all filter messages, regardless of whether it was filter equipment or filter build, which means this one will illuminate and this one will dim. When I click this one, the filter equip is broadcasted, it's listened to by this one, and it says, hey, that's a different filter, so turn me off. So as you click back and forth, these buttons don't know about each other. They don't care about each other. They're simply listening to those broadcast events. So in this case, the broadcast event is filter.build. This is filter.equipment, filter.recipe, filter.abilities, and the other ones automatically pick that up. So a nice way to use the listen for gameplay messages and broadcast gameplay messages so that you don't have to have your buttons know about each other. If I were to add new buttons into that UI, they would just work. They don't need any other incremental components to it. From there, we have our drop zone and our delete. Our delete is slightly simpler than our drop, so let's start there. So we have a simple drop icon. It's just a simple user widget where has some mouse over events. So when we drag an icon into the trash icon, we first check to see if we're allowed to destroy that. And basically all that means is we're grabbing that inventory instance, we're looking up the icon fragment, and we're checking the can be deleted flag. And if it's true, we're going ahead and saying, yeah, we can delete that, or no, we cannot. So yes, we can delete it. We then start to play the drop animation. So the drop animation forward is these animations down here. And drop simply, let me see if I can get this up here. Drop simply scrubs from empty to full. So you can drop. If I drop too soon or if I charge up bad, these are different animations that are going to happen. So under different conditions, we're going to run this animation through completion. So I play my animation forward, and then I perform my trash operation. So I once again grab the instance that I've passed through the drag and drop method, and I perform my trash operation. So performing trash, we simply grab the player state, make a gameplay event. That gameplay event carries the item instance with it, and we send that gameplay event to the actor under this trash activate. So again, using a tag so that I don't actually in this trash widget physically perform the removal of the item from my inventory. I'm simply saying, here's an instance. Please send this tag ability inventory trash to the actor. What then happens is the gameplay ability trash, which is a gameplay ability framework, is listening to the ability inventory trash activate. So this ability triggers whenever I receive this tag. It's the same tag here. So when I say trash this item, the gameplay ability says, okay, I'm being triggered from an event. That event has a payload. That payload has an optional item in it, which we loaded right here with the instance. So we say, hey, here's your payload. Gameplay ability picks up that payload, makes sure that it is an item instance. If it is, we check that we have authority. If we are the server and we have authority, we do one more check to make sure we're allowed to delete this. So not relying upon the UI check to see whether we're allowed, but making one more check that says, hey, on the server, before we go ahead and trash this thing, are we allowed to trash this thing? If that's true, we go get the inventory manager off the controller. We check that it's valid. We check if we need to remove this item from the quick slot, because in some cases it may be in inventory and it may also be in the quick slot. So we need to double check to make sure the quick slot could be removed. This would remove it from the quick slot. And then we call the remove item instance on the inventory manager, which basically then trashes the item instance out of inventory. And then finally, we have one more broadcast, which basically was that first broadcast, which says, hey, I've done something that needs to refresh the inventory screen. So we then broadcast this refresh ID, which is then picked back up by the grid, I believe. Someone was listening to this. The screen. The screen is listening to refresh. So the screen, which is listening for refresh, says, okay, I need to go refresh the grid because the items have changed. So very loosely coupled, the screen via the trash zone broadcasts a trash activate message, which is picked up by the gameplay to trash the item. Once it completes the item trash, it broadcasts the refresh, which is picked back up by the screen and refreshes the grid. And nowhere in here do any of these classes hard reference each other. So no matter when and where I call from a refresh, this logic gets triggered. So slightly different logic in the drop. So I'm not going to go back through the whole drop icon. That's largely the same as the trash icon. If it's allowed, it'll fire off, and it'll create a payload and fire off a message. That message is listened to here on the inventory drop activate as opposed to trash activate. Much of this logic will be similar. We start with the event, we take the payload, we get the instance, we check if we have authority. If we have authority, we are check that we're allowed, and we perform the drop. Now the drop, slightly more complicated than the trash in that I now have to spawn it into the world before I delete it from my inventory. So inside perform drop, we take that instance, we grab our inventory, we check, sorry guys, we check that we're valid. If we're not valid, we just error out. We then spawn the new actor, which is just a macro to collapse things. We'll come back to that in a second. And then we remove it from the quick bar, remove it from the inventory, and broadcast the refresh. So the back of this is the same. The difference is in drop, I need to execute the spawn. And the spawn basically grabs the fragment out of the inventory, checks that the fragment's valid, and then pulls off of that the pickup class, the particle system, whether we're enabling decay, what the lifespan is, what the inventory payload needs to look like, what the mesh is that we're dropping, and any transform offsets. We figure out where we want to spawn it in the world. So we're basically getting the player, figuring out where we're looking, pushing that in front of us a little bit forward, and then we're spawning the actor, setting all of these parameters from the fragment. And then for now, we're simply simulating physics, enabling gravity, adding a little bit of impulse to it to push it away. And then what we're doing is motion checking that once the object stabilizes and lands on the ground, then we'll turn, all of the gravity, et cetera, off. So basically that's how we're dropping an item into the world. And the only other thing I think I didn't do was, removing something from a quick slot. But again, this is very similar, which is we first grab the quick slot fragment and say, hey, do I have a quick slot fragment? If I do, I want to know which slot it's in. So I will check all the slots for this particular item. If I find it and it's our current activated quick slot, then I'm going to cycle my quick slot forward so that automatically shifts you forward to the next quick slot. If it's not my currently activated, but it is in my inventory, then I'll simply remove it from the slot. So slightly different, but same concept. You grab the fragment, you check, you perform a couple of activities, and then you remove that item from the quick slot, just like we did from the inventory. All right, so that's a flyby on how we built the inventory system, starting with the inventory tile, which defines the visuals of the actual inventory tile, the grid, which holds all the inventory items, the screen, which brings it all together, and then the drop and trash icons, which trigger either drop or trash, and the filters, which are toggled on and off based on the messages. So, all right, that's basically it. So we'll stop there and pick it up next. Thanks for watching.